I hear people say things like, maybe it's a sign, maybe I should give up, when one thing after another happens that gets in the way of something that they've set their sights on. Persistence, perseverance, dedication to what you believe is your goal and your destiny is everything. And you'll get there. And don't let those things that look like they're in your way actually be the obstacles that stop you from getting there. Because if we had done that, we wouldn't have our beautiful family and they wouldn't have the lives they have in America. And believe me, there were many times that giving up would have been way easier.
Hello, I'm Philip Sneed, President and CEO of the Arvada Center for the Arts and Humanities. Many of you have donated to our campaign, and we're so grateful for your support. We're nearly 3/4 of the way to our goal of raising $1 million by October 31st. Thank you. This support helps us offset the lost revenue we've experienced due to the pandemic, keeping our staff employed and allowing us to serve the community with virtual and limited in-person programs. This week, you're going to meet Julie Payne, the Arvada Center's Front Range Youth Symphony and Theater Education Coordinator. Julie is also the producer of some of our summer drama camps for children. This summer, she produced a Zoomsicle called The Big 1-0, which was rehearsed and performed entirely in a virtual format. The Arvada Center was one of the first organizations to do this in response to the pandemic. In addition, Julie and her husband David write and direct children's theater. Most recently, they directed The Velveteen Rabbit and Seussical the Musical for the Arvada Center. Julie comes from a family of entertainers and has dedicated her career to the performing arts. She brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to her role.
Well, I grew up in an arts-oriented family. I have a friend who explains me by saying that I was raised by clowns because my parents became clowns in retirement, and they were named Grandpa Tweedle and Dipsy Deedle, and they were very cute birthday clowns. My dad loved to do the clown handshake, and that's when you go up to somebody and you shake their hand and then you jump up and down as if their handshake was so strong that it was making him bounce up and down. But I actually grew up with the arts in my life from the time I was a little girl. My dad was a radio announcer, and so we moved around a whole lot. We lived all over the place and finally ended up in Denver. And my mom had come out first to kind of scout things out. She decided that she wanted to make sure that we had a racially diverse area to be in when we first moved here. So we moved to Montbello. I was extremely shy when I was little, very, very shy. I was a kid who never raised her hand in class because I was afraid I'd disappear or explode or something, so I just was quiet. But I knew I wanted to be an actress. My brother, from the time he was really little, maybe 6 years old, decided that he wanted to be a magician, and that's what he does. I worked a year before I went to college. I worked at Country Dinner Playhouse, and I am really not very well versed in technical theater, but it was a job in the theater, and so I thought, I'm taking it. I was the prop girl and costume mistress, which was really weird because I didn't sew at all. My mother sewed those, and I took it was crazy. And then I ended up going to UNC, and I was there a year or two, I guess, before I met David Payne. Yeah, and he had come up as a theater major too, and I always call him David Payne. It's my pet name for him, even though that's his name. I always refer to him as David Payne.
In comes this beautiful girl who turned out to be in theater, and then we got cast together in a show. And that was our first production together, and you had a beard.
Yeah, well, I did, that's true. But then we ended up being cast together as twins, actually, in What the Butler Saw. And we looked much more alike then than we do now. The rest, as they say, is history. We started a children's theater company, and it was called, our company was called 7 Ages Productions. We toured regionally, and we were the most booked children's theater in the region at that point in time. And then eventually, the Arvada Center became interested in what we were doing because they wanted to tour some things to the parks during the summer. But that was even after we had already performed at the Arvada Center. We actually wrote several of the children's shows that were done in the amphitheater. We did mashups, basically, of fairy tales. And so we wrote those and then also got to direct those in the amphitheater.
Frog and Toad has a very special place in our hearts because it's such a beautiful show.
Really sweet story.
Julie P. Jones, every single song just,
Yeah.
and part of that was the choreography that just made it so memorable for me.
I loved Symphony. I
Yeah.
loved that one. It was just so fun because we decided on this concept that these were imagination. It was just everybody on stage was coming out of the imagination, and it was just so fun and such a great cast. And yeah, but they've all been really wonderful for different reasons. So the arts have always been a big part of our lives, and we don't know what we would do without that. And it's interesting because we have two daughters, and they're both grown women now. They're 27 and 24. They're really not interested in the arts. But that's partly because they did not grow up with us. We adopted them. That's a journey in itself, the really condensed version of our adoption story, and we love telling it because it's just it's really kind of well, it was very life-altering, and it's pretty amazing. A trip to go to Latvia, we had a sister church there. We didn't even know we had a sister church there, but we do, and so Ryan Durfee, he asked us to go, and he said, but I want you to also take a drama component. I want you to write something that we can perform. And he said, we're going to be going to small towns all over Latvia, mostly in the churches, but we're going to visit some orphanages. We were touring through the orphanage, and the orphanage director was explaining everything to us. And I turned to my right, and I saw this young girl, and I thought, that's my daughter. And we had no intention at all of adopting, and but I was so moved by her. I thought instead I'm going to go ahead and get the address of the orphanage, and I'm going to write to this girl. And I had asked her her name, and her name was Baiba, which is the first time I had ever heard that name, but it's a very common Latvian name, it turns out. And I asked her how old she was, and she said she was 13. And then somebody else on the tour said, and how long have you been here? And she said 13 years, and my heart just... I didn't say anything to David about it at all.
I spotted this girl out in the crowd holding a little boy on her lap, and I thought, wow, that's a young worker here. And then I thought, no, that's a little orphan that has never been adopted.
Connecting with the orphans and talking to them, we got on the bus to leave, and David sat down by me, and then he got off the bus, and I didn't know why, and he came back on, and he sat down next to me, and he said, that girl. And I said, you mean Baiba? And he goes, yeah.
After the concert, I went down to hand out candy, went right to the little boy, gave him one, and she turned away, and I said, oh, no, you need one too. And this little voice said, thank you. And that was my first contact with her. So independently, we had seen the same child, and it turned out she had an older sister who had appeared and was part of the tour, but we didn't really notice her. And I had jumped off the bus and took a picture of both of them because I realized, I had kind of overheard that she had a sister.
So I didn't say anything else to David, but he kept bringing up Baiba over and over again the next couple of days. And finally I said, should we be talking about adoption? And he was like, yeah. I was so surprised. And he goes, and she has a sister. And then I was like, oh, I had no idea. So we didn't even know if it was possible between our two countries, but we found out it was. We had also found out that the oldest one was not adoptable because she had turned 16 in the meantime. And at that point, you could not adopt a 16 or 17-year-old, even with a sibling. And as we told them we wanted to adopt them, they said, but we were going to have to work on how to get, Agnesa is the name of the oldest one. She goes by Agnes now that she's in America. They said, what about Madara? And we, Madara? Well, that was their oldest sister. And so now we find out there's 3. And she was already 18. And we said, well, we don't know what we can do about that, but we're going to see what we can do to get the 2 of you. And we ended up in a 2-year journey in order to get them. We had to raise a considerable amount of money because international adoption turns out to be really expensive. And then also we had to get the law changed in order to adopt the oldest one. So we band together with several other people around the country. We found out we're doing the same thing, and that there was already a proposal for this law to be changed so that 16 and 17-year-olds could be adopted with a sibling. And it got changed. And so at that point, I think it was November of 2010, Obama signed it into law. But at first, in March of 2011, we got word that yes, we could still adopt Baiba, but they weren't going to let us adopt Agnesa. And after all this time that we've been struggling to get her, I said, well, we just don't know how to do the paperwork. We finally got them officially United States citizens adopted 2 weeks before our oldest daughter turned 18, at which point she would have been, nobody could have adopted her because 18 was too old. Well, actually, during the course of those 2 years, some friends of ours decided to take on the care of the oldest one, and so they have been her parents from afar. They haven't been able to get her here. They've tried, and it's just not worked. But they support her financially, emotionally. They consider themselves her parents. And then once they got here, we found out they actually had another sister who was hosted by, I got a text message with a picture and that said, "Is this your daughter's sister?" And I said, "I don't know." I showed it to them and they said, "Oh yeah, that's our sister." And she was hosted by a family in Fort Collins, who was just hosting her to host, not with the interest to adopt. But then a family in Highlands Ranch ended up adopting her, and so she actually lived with us for quite a while too. So we had the 3 of them for a while. And when the 4th one had moved here, she decided to try and find the 5th one. And so she went on Facebook and just to see, and sure enough, the 5th daughter was living in France and had always wondered if she had sisters. So she had put her Latvian name on Facebook, which the one who also moved here found, and connected everybody. And so on the day that Evia is her name, she's grown up in France. Her French name is Floriane, but she was Evia. She didn't even know she had sisters, and she connected with our oldest daughter because our oldest daughter could also speak French. And so they connected on French and English, and no Latvian involved at all. And that day on Facebook, she posted a picture of her fingers, and she put the name of each of her sisters on her fingers and said, "This is the best day of my life. I found out I have sisters." We have our 2, but all 5 of them are now connected. Adoption journey really taught us that persistence, perseverance, dedication to what you believe is your goal and your destiny is everything. For me, that's the lesson right now too. Everything's harder right now. And so if we decide that we're going to make the list of all the things that are too hard and maybe it's not worth it and all of that, we won't ever know if it's worth it if we don't go ahead and take those challenges head on and see what we can do to get to the end.
As you can see, Julie has a passion for the performing arts, and she wants to instill an appreciation for the arts in our youth. At the Arvada Center, we believe this appreciation can be cultivated to find the next generation of musicians and actors. If nothing else, what Julie does is give these kids an outlet for creative expression that is healthy and joyful. Right now, that's exactly what our kids need to get through this pandemic. Please consider making a donation to help us continue this work and reignite the arts.